And certainly to Mr. Evans, County Executive, thank you, brother, for your leadership, you and your wife. Thank you. Certainly to one of my mentors and heroes, Judge Craig Strong, always the cleanest brother in any arena. He represents Detroit all over America. And to Attorney Robin McCoy, a great young lawyer, a civil rights stalwart. I'm always proud to fight with that young queen. I know we're fighting for the black judges now who are under attack, and we have to make sure that the Michigan Supreme Court, and we're happy, they have commissioned a study for the fairness of black judges. We just got to make sure it's independent and that the cards aren't stacked against those two sisters who they unjustly tried to remove from the bench. But without you, Robin, we wouldn't know it outside of Michigan. So thank you, Queen. The ancestors look down and smile when they see you walk in the courtroom. Yeah. And to all the black lawyers and judges who are present here, please stand up because we're in this together, and without you all, we can't win this battle for our people. Y'all give the black judges and lawyers a big round of applause. We're in this together. Thank you. And certainly to Kareem Ali, my investigator and security who made sure I got on the plane even though I was feeling a little under the weather. Kareem, thank you always for getting me to where I need to be. And then finally, Mr. Barclay, I got to thank one other group of people, and then I will begin to make my arguments. Now, all great men may not be members of Omega Psi Phi, but all members of Omega Psi Phi are great men. Will all my fraternity brothers please stand and be recognized, the greatest fraternity on planet Earth. Thank you, brothers. And to all the Divine Nine, I see the pink and green, everybody, thank you all so much, Deltas, everyone, thank you. And I think Hill Harper has some representatives here, so I want to thank that brother for running his historic race, and Pam Pugh, who went to Florida A&M. I come from Tallahassee. She's a great young leader, and hopefully will be Congresswoman Pugh. Her whole family, President Pugh was longtime president of the state NAACP. So I always try to celebrate us, Dr. Evans, who dare take the mantle of leadership. It matters when our children see black people in leadership positions. So thank them for running. And so I will make my argument this evening to you all. May it please the court. Thank you, Your Honor. So, the argument I want to make is that the enemies of equality will not win this battle. People of good moral conscience will win this battle for our children to have a better future, a better world. Because we can make a better world, a better America, where George Floyd gets an opportunity to take another breath without having a police officer's knee on his neck for 9 minutes and 29 seconds while he says, "I can't breathe," 28 times. And we can make a better world, a better America, where Breonna Taylor gets an opportunity to sleep in peace without the Louisville Metropolitan Police Department kicking open her front door at 1 o'clock in the morning and executing an unnecessary, unjustifiable, and an unconstitutional, and Judge Strong, I may add, an illegal no-knock warrant, because after we got involved, we were able to reveal that the police officers lied on the probable cause affidavit to entice the judge to sign the no-knock warrant in the first place. And so we can make a better world, a better America where Breonna gets to sleep in peace without them kicking in that front door and mutilating that sister in her own apartment while she was practically naked in her nightgown with 8 bullet holes. And we can give our children a better world, a better America, where Ahmaud Arbery gets to run free in Brunswick, Georgia, without being lynched for jogging while black, not in 1940, Dr. Morgan, not in 1950. We're talking about in 2020, in our day, they lynched that young brother. We can give our children a better world, a better America, where all of them have an equal opportunity to the American promise of life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. We can do that, but we gotta be willing to speak truth to power. We gotta be willing to strategically fight this battle. I remember, Mr. Evans, my grandmother, she told me, she said, baby, when you get a chance to speak truth to power, you do it. She said, you do it. She said, it doesn't matter if they call you controversial. It doesn't matter if they call you a race baiter. It doesn't matter if they say it's inconvenient. She said, when you get a chance to speak truth to power, she said, you do it, even if your knees are knocking. She said, even if your palms are sweating, even if your heart is racing and your voice is cracking. Robin, she said, if you get a chance to speak truth to power, you do it, because too many people sacrifice for you. Our ancestors getting lynched, our children getting hung from trees, people going to give their nipples to other children, babies, couldn't even birth their own. People getting up, taking the early bus. People doing so much to sacrifice for you to have this legal education and these resources that when you get a chance to speak up for us, baby, you got to do it. Amen? And so that's the first thing we do to win this war. We simply have the courage to speak truth to power. And then I submit to you, brothers and sisters, we must follow Martin Luther King's legal advice. What is Martin Luther King's legal advice, you ask? Well, it's right there in his letter from the Birmingham jail. And Robin, you've heard me talk about this. I submit to you, letter from the Birmingham jail is one of the greatest essays ever written in the course of human history. Yeah, it is profound. And Mr. Barclay, I suggest everybody take a look at it when you get a chance, because and remember the context of which it was produced. Martin Luther King was there fighting for black people to have a right to vote. You know, it's kind of funny now, Mr. Evans. Everybody loves King. everybody marched for King. Everybody was supporting him. When the reality was, when Martin Luther King was down there fighting for equality for black people, he was one of the most hated men in America, if not the world. And so the members of the Ministerial Alliance, the white ministers, wrote an op-ed piece and put it on the front of the Birmingham newspaper. And they called Martin Luther King everything but a child of God. They said he was an outside agitator. He was a race baiter. He was a troublemaker. He should just go back where he came from. They don't need him in Birmingham, Alabama. They said that he should just wait and let things take its due course. How long have black people been waiting for things to take its due course? And so, his attorney, Fred Gray, another great Omega man, came and visited him at the jail because the New York Times and others had asked him, did he have a response to the minister's message to him? And so Dr. King took the newspaper and he started writing on the edges of the newspaper, and then he covered all the front edges. He turned it over, wrote on the back edges of the newspaper, and then when nobody was looking, Fred Gray slipped him one sheet of his legal paper, and he started writing on that there, front and back, Craig, and then he gave it to Fred Gray to sneak out the jail, and the New York Times published it, and the rest is history. Because the letter was so profound, we all remember parts of the letter, especially everybody remembers when he said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. But I submit to you, I don't think that's the most profound part of the letter. I think, Judge Strong, the most profound part of the letter is when Dr. King says, we as moral people have an obligation to oppose injustice when we see it. He said, if we don't call ourselves good people, you can't see evil and look the other way. You know, he said, neutrality in the face of injustice is a choice. It is a choice. And so he was talking to the soul of men's conscience. He talked about, if you're going to try to say you're a moral person, well, you got this moral obligation to fight for right and oppose injustice. And Dr. King said, which I really think is the crux of the matter, he said, just because they say it's legal, that don't make it right. He said, we must remember that everything Hitler did to the Jews in Germany, they said was legal. But he said that didn't make it right. He said we must remember that they said slavery was legal, but that didn't make it right. He said we must remember that they said segregation was legal, but that didn't make it right. And he said, we must remember everything they did to that little boy Emmett Till in Money, Mississippi, they said was legal. But he said that didn't make it right. So when they try to tell us that the police were justified in killing Breonna Taylor, we all got to say in unison, but that don't make it right. I never forget meeting my personal hero, Thurgood Marshall. Justice Marshall, I met him twice, once at a National Bar Association meeting, but the first time I met him, I was still an undergraduate. We went with the HBCU students, and all of us went to the Supreme Court, Judge Strong, and you know how they all come out in their ceremonial robes, and they have the chief judge make a few remarks, and then the justices would come off the bench and they would go interact with the different groups assembled. And so Justice Marshall made his way over to our little group of young black college students, all striving to be attorneys one day. And I never forget what Justice Marshall said to us. He told us, number one, he said, you all are going to be great attorneys. You all are going to do great things. He said, and I want you all to go all around the country and argue what is right. He never told us go argue what is legal. He said go argue what is right. And I bear that in my heart. Every time I walk in a courtroom, let's go argue what is right. And so we must follow Martin Luther King's legal advice to win this battle. And then I turned to Ben Franklin, who said that democracy is like two wolves and a lamb voting on what to have for lunch. You ain't got to be a PhD like Dr. Coleman to know who's going to win that vote. But he said, liberty, he said, as opposed to democracy, is making sure that that young lamb is well armed to protest that vote. So what we must do, brothers and sisters, we must make sure that our young lambs, those young lambs who are marginalized, those young lambs of color, are well armed to protest that vote. We got to make sure our children are well armed to protest the school to prison pipeline that has them in the crosshairs. We have to make sure that our young people are well armed to protest becoming another statistic of the prison industrial complex. We have to make sure that our young lambs are well armed to be able to protest the denial of access to capital with all these banking while black cases going all across America. We have to make sure our young lambs are well armed to protest denial of access to quality health care. We have to make sure that our young lambs of color are well armed to protest environmental racism that would see our brothers and sisters in Flint, Michigan not have clean water. That would see, we can't ever forget about Flint. And there's a Flint in every state in America. Environmental racism like we see, Shar, where little black and brown children living in South Central Los Angeles has but a third of the lung capacity as little white children living 20 miles down the road in Santa Monica, California, because they have made it legal to have poisonous chemical polluting factories in our backyards where our children go to school and play and live every day. Now, they'll make it illegal in their communities, but they say it's okay if you put it over there in their community. We got to make sure our young children are well armed to say, oh, hell no. When they become county executives, Mr. Evans, our young people got to be ready to challenge them and speak truth to power at every turn when they try to say, oh, it's okay if their children breathe in, the toxic fumes. It's okay for their children to have a shorter life expectancy. Now, we got to make sure our children are well armed to protest them being the victims of the enemies of equality. And we must make sure that our children are well armed, not with guns or assault weapons or any means of violence. Nah, that ain't how we win this war. We win this war by making sure our children are well armed with intellect, with strategic thinking, with diplomacy. That's how we win this war. I mean, if you remember nothing else I say this evening, if you remember nothing else I say this evening, remember this: the enemies of equality cannot win this war as long as we make sure that our children are more intelligent than those who would seek to oppress them. That's how we win this war, y'all, and we can't take it for granted. And I'm honored, Mr. Barclay, to be here at this iconic Charles Wright Museum of African American History, because right now, brothers and sisters, our black history is under attack all across America. All across America. And there's a reason for that. There's a reason for that. Those who don't intend to teach history honestly, I believe, plan on repeating history. I mean, there's a reason why black history is under attack. They want to be able to make it comfortable to repeat the sins of the past. And you see it happening. I mean, they're banning books. I mean, they are banning books. In 2024, they're banning our most celebrated black authors. I mean, they're banning books like Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. They're banning Alice Walker, The Color Purple. They're banning books like James Baldwin's Go Tell It on the Mountain. Well, we better go tell it on the mountain. And I know I'm preaching to the choir tonight, but the choir got to sing louder because we are under attack, y'all. We are under attack. Black history is under attack. And I mean, they even banning books, Kareem, by white authors who talk about the humanity of black people. They banned Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird. And I was looking, I said, but she white. They said, but she exalts the humanity of black people. And so they say, that's going to be banned too. I mean, it is so disturbing that they are banning books. I mean, the same thing that we attack communist Russia and China for, we're doing in states like Florida and Texas and Virginia and Tennessee. I mean, they said that we can't teach advanced placement of African American history. And Judge Strong, it was awfully peculiar to me when I looked at the list of advanced placement histories that we could teach. We could teach Italian history, we could teach European history, we could teach Chinese history. I mean, we can teach every history except advanced placement history. And so that tells you that they are trying to attack us from the very core because it's about intellect. It's about knowing why things are. If you don't know how things were in the past, you don't understand why they are as they are today. And so that's history. And when I think about it, and I said this at the NAACP Image Awards, I talked about another great Omega man, Carter G. Woodson, the father of black history. Yeah. Carter G. Woodson said two profound things. The first, I talked about it at the Image Awards because Carter G. Woodson said, if a race has no history, if a race has no traditions or values that are worthy to be taught to our children in the next generation, he said, then that race becomes a negligible thought in the mind of the world, and thus becomes in danger of being exterminated from the face of the earth. Brothers and sisters, we can't let no elected Florida governor or any other elected official exterminate our black history, our black literature, or our black culture. We got to shout it from the mountaintop that without black history, there would be no American history. And that's important, not just for little black children to know that, but we got to make sure that little white children and little brown children and little red children and all our children know that their history contributed to the greatness of America. They all got to know that their history and their culture matters. Yeah, it's so vitally important that we understand the game of the enemies of equality. That's why the Wright Museum is so relevant today. Because if they won't teach black history in the classrooms, we got to have somewhere where they see that black people are just as important as any other people. And Carter G. Woodson said, and it was kind of profound, Mr. Barclay, and I tell you, this stuff is so, talking about speak truth to power. Carter G. Woodson said, you know, they removed the shackles from our ankles and our wrists, but we must make sure that we have to remove the shackles from our mind. He said, we have to do that. Because he said, when a man controls your thinking, you don't have to worry about telling him to stay here or to go yonder. He said, when the man controls your thinking, you don't have to worry about telling him to go to the back door. In fact, he said, when you control a man's thinking, if there's no back door, he will cut one for his own special benefit. That's why it's so important that we make sure our children are intellectually superior to those oppressors. Because they are trying to stop our children from having an equal opportunity at not just the American dream, but at humanity. I mean, I digress for a second. Yeah, Robin Judge Strong, man, I often go in courtrooms all across America, and when I have extra time, I just sometimes go sit in the back of a courtroom. And you look at how young black and brown people, when they administer justice, as opposed to young white people who have very similar fact patterns. And that's why black judges are so important, Robin. Because oftentimes what you see is the young white children get a slap on the wrist. And then they're escorted out the courtroom to live out the fulfillment of their destiny that God has for them, unblemished. And then oftentimes you see the little black and brown children taken to the corner of the courtroom, fingerprinted and convicted of a trumped up felony conviction, and I do mean trumped up. Yeah. And they then have to live the rest of their lives as a convicted felon. They have to bear that scarlet letter for the rest of their lives, and they can never get away from it. I mean, when they apply for a job, the first thing that pops up is convicted felon. When they apply to get an apartment, first thing that pops up is convicted felon. When they go try to get life insurance, first thing that pops up is a convicted felon. And so, yeah, and I know I'm getting to the end, Kareem. I don't want to be held in contempt, but this is so critical, Mr. Barclay. I mean, every time I see one of our brothers and sisters, well, I guess I should say this first. In states like my home state of Florida, in Texas and Tennessee and many other states, I'm sure Michigan ain't too different. 1 out of every 5 black men are convicted felons. And they say if this trend continues in the next 25 years, 1 out of every 3 black men in America will be a convicted felon and have to live a permanent life as an underclass citizen who can't, because the information age, it is the most prominent thing, the most definitive attribute that America strives to you, that you are a convicted felon. And yeah, it is so challenging for our brothers and sisters once they get that label, once they get that badge, that scarlet letter. And so, if some of you are like me, who have family members who have been labeled a convicted felon, I want to encourage you to do like me every time I see them. I always tell them, hey man, you still got a long life. You still gonna be a constructive citizen to society. You still are one of the best things your mom and daddy gave our community. You still are one of the people who God has a plan for. We still believe in you, brother. We still believe in you, sister. Man, don't think that they can stop you. You can do anything. Because we have to encourage our people. We have to believe in our brothers and sisters. Because if we don't, we will have a whole generation of our black children who have been defined by a racist criminal justice system as permanent underclass citizens. And I refuse to let them define our children. And so that's why we have to make sure our children are well prepared, well armed for this battle. I got 2 quick points and then I know I got to get off because time flies when you're having fun. 2 quick points. Other thing I want y'all to remember tonight, how we win this war, is to make sure we have upstream thinking. There's a book entitled Upstream. And the basic premise of the book is simply this, that one day a brother on a sunny afternoon was walking downriver, and all of a sudden, he heard a young black child say, help me, oh my God, help me. I'm drowning, help me, save me. I'm gonna die, help me. And the brother then all of a sudden said, oh my God, and he jumped in the river, and he helped drag the young black child to the riverbank. And he said, oh man, and he kind of gathered himself, got the water off his clothes and stuff, said, thank God I was here, because if I wasn't here, that young black child would have died. And just as he can start to get back upright, he heard a second black child say, help me, oh my God, I'm drowning, help me, I'm gonna die, help me. And the brother all of a sudden, he then went and jumped in the river for a second time. And Mr. Barclay, he dragged the second black child to the riverbank, and he saved his life. And as he started to gather himself again and get the water out of his hair, he heard a third black child say, help me, I'm drowning, help me, I'm gonna die, save me, help me. And the brother jumped in the river again, but as he pulled the young black child to the riverbank, he said, what I want to know is who the hell upstream keep throwing our black children in the river in the first place? because it's too late to save them all once they get downriver. So we got to go upstream and prevent them from throwing our children away in this racist criminal justice society, throwing our children away to gang violence and all these other nefarious things. We got to have an upstream mentality to prevent our children from getting caught up in the system in the first place. So that's how we win this war. We go upstream to stop them. And then my final point is simply this, and I'll rest my case and ask for your verdict. How we win this war. How we win this war. My personal hero, Thurgood Marshall, said it best. I think Thurgood and maybe Kareem, we tell them what Dr. King said too. But Thurgood said the basis of the American Constitution is simply this, that a black baby born to a black mother, he said the most uneducated black mother, the most inarticulate black mother, he said the most impoverished black mother, has the same exact rights as a white baby born to a white mother. He said the most educated white mother, the most articulate white mother, the most affluent white mother. He said, just by that baby drawing its first breath as an American citizen. Now, Justice Marshall said, I know that's not the case in America today, but I challenge anybody to say that's not a goal worth fighting for. I challenge anybody to say that's not what makes America the great beacon of hope and justice for all the world to marvel. So, brothers and sisters, when we fight for the George Floyds of the world, when we fight for the Breonna Taylors of the world, when we fight for the Josephs of the world, when we fight for the Trayvon Martins of the world, when we fight for the Atiana Jeffersons of the world, when we fight for the Alton Sterlings of the world, when we fight for the 14-year-old Tamir Rices of the world, when we fight for the Eric Gardners of the world, when we fight for the Stephon Clarks of the world, when we fight for the Ezel Fords of the world, when we fight for the Michael Brown Hands Up, Don't Shoot of the world, when we fight for all of our brothers and sisters who unfortunately are taken from this earth far too soon in very unjustifiable ways. When we fight for the unknown George Floyds of the world. Yeah. When we fight, as my grandmother would often say, using the biblical reference, when we fight for the least of these, then what we are really doing is helping America live up to its creed. What we're really doing is helping America be the great beacon of hope and justice for all the world to marvel. But most importantly, brothers and sisters assembled at the Charles Wright Museum of African American History, is we're helping America to be America for all Americans. And that's intricate in winning this battle against the enemies of equality. And the very final thing I would say is we got to remember what Martin Luther King said. The coward, he said, will ask the question, is it safe? He said expediency will ask the question, is it politically correct? Then he said, vanity comes along and asks the question, is it popular? But then Dr. King said conscience comes along and asks the question, is it right? And Dr. King said there comes a time when one must take a position that's neither popular, nor politically correct, nor even safe. But Dr. King said there comes a time when one must take a position because their conscience tells them it is the right thing to do. I submit to you, brothers and sisters, it is the right thing to do for us to speak up for our children's future. It is the right thing to do for us to stand up for our children's future. It is the right thing to do to fight for our children's future. Because if we ain't willing to fight for our children's future, we can't expect nobody else to go fight for the future of little black children. We can't expect nobody else to save us if we ain't willing to fight to save ourselves, save our children's future. And I tell you, I have a 11-year-old beautiful little girl named Brooklyn, and I don't ever want my daughter to look at me and question, Daddy, do you really mean it when you say Black Lives Matter? Nah, I don't ever want her to ask that question because I want her to see it. I want her to see me fighting for our black people, our black culture, our black communities. I want her to know it. I want her to know that we believe in our black children's future so much that we're willing to sacrifice everything, even if that means giving our life for our children, just like our ancestors sacrificed for us. Our children gotta know it. They gotta know that we will fight to the end, that we will fight till hell freezes over. And then they gotta know we'll be ready to fight on the ice. I rest my case. Thank you. God bless you. Don't go, yeah, I'll take some questions.
We'll sit you here. Oh, yeah. Okay, we'll sit here. Thanks, sir. Have a seat. All right. Let's give another round of applause for Benjamin Crump. It is no wonder that you've been such an advocate for black people and for the causes that he represented. It's remarkable to hear you speak.
Thank you, man.
We're in the shadow now of the murder of George Floyd that served as a catalyst for what some would describe as a global movement for racial justice, right? But there's been countless incidents of law enforcement killing black and brown people. Why do you think George Floyd was so different?
There's many factors why George Floyd became such a historic tragedy, and the conviction of the officers that killed him became such a landmark case, Judge Strong. And I think context is everything, Mr. Barclay. We were in a pandemic where everything was shut down. I mean, grocery stores, our jobs, everything shut down in America seemed like, except racism and discrimination and police excessive force on black people. Yeah. I mean, think about it. In the pandemic, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and so many other cases that you don't know, they were still doing during the course of a pandemic. But because we were all home and we were fixated on all our devices because everybody had to be introverts at that point. So we were all on social media. And so when the George Floyd video was released by that Daniela Frazier, that young high school girl, it went viral because we were all fixated, but also I think because it was the first time we had saw in live video coverage the police torturing a black man to death. It was the first time we saw it. And even to this day when I watch the video, Neil, I still, and I've seen the video now probably 1,000 times. I still think that Chauvin is going to take his knee off his neck. Because humanity will require. The man said, I can't breathe and so forth. You just believe in your heart of hearts that he's going to take his knee off, and he never does. It kind of, and so I think that's why George Floyd became that seminal case, just like I think Trayvon Martin was the Emmett Till of our time when he walked on with that bag of Skittles and can of iced tea, and the neighborhood watch volunteers shot him in the heart. And we saw that hoodie with that hole where his heart would have been. And I often think about the suffering of black parents. I think about Sabrina Fulton, Trayvon's mother, who said, every day when I wake up from sleep, I want to believe, she said, that it was just a bad nightmare. And I'm going to open my eyes and I'm going to see my son smiling that big goofy smile, and he's going to be alive. And she said that a few minutes she realizes she's never going to see him, and it's real, and her heart is broken all over again.
One of the things that strikes me about your work and your career is you've been so close to so many families in those moments of just profound tragedy that you're describing. And I just wonder what we could learn from those families and how they have decided to persevere within, in those moments where there's just unspeakable sort of sorrow.
Yeah, and obviously it's a fraternity that nobody wants to be in. I'll say this quickly because I do want to touch base on Henrietta Lacks just for a second. But it's like Jay-Z did a documentary on Trayvon called Trayvon Rest in Power. And Sabrina recounted she was heartbroken. Everybody see Trayvon's mother now, and she's this poised sister who God can get up and convey her thoughts. That first press conference we did, she was so heartbroken, she couldn't even get a word out. All she could do was cry. And she kept crying. And I remember even getting her to do that press conference. She was saying, I'm not going to do anything. I'm grieving. I'm not going to do any interviews and so forth, because Tracy Martin, his father, was doing interviews with me. But it was like, hello, Mr. Martin, we need his mother to come and do the interviews with us. And she was so devastated. She said, I can't. I got to grieve and so forth. And I remember telling her, I said, Sabrina, this is so unfair, and ain't nothing fair about it. And I can't even lie to you. But you got a decision to make, sweetheart. You can grieve, and when you come out of your grief, month 2 down the line, everybody would have forgotten about your son. It would be as if he never existed. Or you can make the decision to fight. And she made the decision to fight. And that's what we got to do. And even in our worst moments, we still got to be willing to fight for our children's humanity and their legacy. So, and we just, like I said in the video, we got to fight racism and injustice wherever it rears its ugly head. I would be remiss if I didn't say something about Henrietta Lacks.
Please.
Netflix is doing the next documentary on our historic case for Henrietta Lacks. Y'all know the story of Henrietta Lacks.
Tell us a little bit about it. Yeah.
1951, medical racism was running rampant in America. Tuskegee syphilis experiment, they inflicted the men with syphilis, wouldn't treat them. They gave it to their women, and they had children. Children had syphilis, wouldn't treat them. Just pure evil. And then in Mississippi, they had the Mississippi appendectomy, where black women would go in for routine medical procedures, and they would end up sterilizing them. The most famous being the civil rights icon Fannie Lou Hamer, who said, "I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired." You know, she went in at 23 years old for a routine checkup. They sterilized her, and she could never have children. But because she had a college degree, she went and she started researching this, Robin, and she found out that they were doing this to black women, not only all across Mississippi, they were doing it in Georgia and North Carolina and Tennessee, just sterilizing black women because they didn't want us to be able to procreate. And so that's what you had going on in America. And then in Baltimore, Maryland, at Johns Hopkins, you had ultimate medical racism. They were trying to do research to see if a human cell could survive outside of the human body. And Neil, we don't know how many black people they killed in this research. I mean, they were just using black people as guinea pigs, as lab rats. In fact, when we were doing research on our case, they said, the old people said, we were told when we were children, man, don't go near Johns Hopkins at nighttime because they'll snatch you up. They were the original body snatchers. I mean, snatching our people up and experimenting on them. So Henrietta Lacks she was a 31-year-old wife and mother, beautiful sister of 5. And they try to say she was illiterate and all like that because when they do bad things, they want to try to justify it by saying, oh, well, they really was just, feeble-minded and all this stuff to try to justify doing it. She went to the hospital for what was very treatable cervical cancer. Oprah Winfrey did a movie about 12 years ago called The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. And so when she went there, man, they put radiation rods in her female genitalia and spread it open, and they cut the cancer tissue and they cut part of her healthy tissue out. And I'm learning a little more about radiation and how bad my little brother is suffering from lung cancer. And he goes through so many bouts of chemotherapy because what they're trying to do is reduce the cancer, reduce the tumors down to the point of when they have to use the radiation because it's so potentially harmful, it's so potentially fatal that they want to use the least amount possible. Well, they didn't care about black people back then in 1951, and they put the radiation rods in her, and it's almost biblical, Neil. I mean, what great sacrifice, because after they did this, they sent her on home with no care at all, and she lived 8 more months, and she died a horrible death. I mean, her family talked about how they would hear her moaning and screaming in the middle of the night from the effects of radiation rods being stuck inside your female parts. And I mean, such sacrifice, but yet she gave the world such a great contribution. And I'm not surprised, Robin, that it was a black woman whose cells were the strongest for the first time in the course of human history to be able to survive outside of the human body. And not only did Henrietta Lacks cells survive, but they would reduplicate themselves every 24 hours. Every 24 hours. I mean, they hadn't seen anything like this, sister. In fact, her cells every 24 hours now regenerate themselves, and every pharmaceutical company in the world have made billions upon billions upon billions of dollars because of her healer cells, Henrietta Lacks healer cells. But her family never made one red penny. Never one red penny. So they came to me after Juneteenth 2021. They said, Attorney Crump, would you represent our family? And there was this black professor named Dr. Deliso Alfred who had wrote this law review article called Unjust Enrichment of Henrietta Lacks and put in Henrietta the cells back in Henrietta's body to get some form of justice. And so, Neil, I'm crazy because I went and filed a suit because I thought it was such an injustice. And we filed under the theory of unjust enrichment, which is a well-established legal principle that applies to everybody, it seems like, except black people. It's a simple theory. Is that the wrongdoer can't continue to benefit from the wrongdoing. And nobody would say that it wasn't a crime what they did to that black woman without her consent. I mean, killing her ultimately. Mm-hmm. And so we filed a suit, and then we were in court, Neil, and the opposing counsel, I mean, you had Henrietta Lacks, all her family on one side of the courtroom, and all these highfalutin lawyers who represent all these pharmaceutical companies on the other side. And our legal team was at the table, and Kareem, you may remember, the opposing counsel said, Attorney Crump must be crazy just thinking he can bring a 70-year-old lawsuit. And, you know, we objected. Can't be calling me crazy, man.
Come on now.
And so the judge agreed, and the judge said, you know, we're all officers of the court, and we're not going to use disparaging remarks against anybody in here, and so forth. So he apologized, and then he said, but what I'm saying, Your Honor, is how does Attorney Crump plan to get past the statute of limitations and so forth? Because generally, statute of limitations are every 2 years, or at most 4 years in every state in America. If you don't bring the lawsuit, then you're forever barred. Yeah. And so Henrietta Lacks, obviously, this crime happened in 1951. And so then the judge looked at me, she said, Attorney Crump, do you have a response? And I said, well, certainly, Your Honor, because as we have articulated in this very courtroom all morning, Henrietta Lacks is unprecedented. Henrietta Lacks, there's nothing like her. I mean, the fact that her cells can regenerate outside her body is unprecedented every 24 hours. And even though they've had other cell lines of other people that would last 2-3 years, they would quit reproducing. But Henrietta Lacks cells have been reproducing for 70 years. I mean, she is the mother of modern medicine. Every vaccine, every medicine, every benefit of legal research in the last 50 years has been because of this black woman. And so I say, so Your Honor, understand, Your Honor, the family isn't asking for a percentage of the profits from the pharmaceutical company, this pharmaceutical company, from 1951 to 2018. Because we outside the statute of limitations. But I said, now, Your Honor, as we articulated, every 24 hours, her cells regenerate. And those cells that regenerated yesterday, we expect a percentage of all those profits. All those profits. And the stars lined up, Mr. Barclay, because in the Eastern District Federal Court in Baltimore, Maryland, the judge did something that people thought they would never see. The judge denied their motion to dismiss. And for the first time, which this was just God, they meant it for bad, God meant it for good. They were doing stall tactics. And we end up finally being able to resolve the matter on August 1st, 2023, which would have been Henrietta Lacks' 103rd birthday. And so we finally got to give her a present for everything she had given to the world. And sadly, Lawrence Lacks, who was her last son, who we brought the lawsuit on behalf of, he died 2 months and 2 weeks later. And I want to believe, Mr. Barclay, he was holding on. They had been fighting this battle forever. He was holding on just so when he got to heaven, he could tell his mom, I stood the test, I fought the good fight, and Mama, we finally got you some justice.
There you go. Thank you for that. Probably have time for just a couple of questions from the audience. There's some mics that are coming around. Probably just for two. We're running a little bit late on time. Any questions out there? I can't really see with the light in my eye. Rochelle. Do you have a mic? Does somebody have the mic for her? Yeah.
Hello, Attorney Crump. I'm Rochelle Riley. I work for the mayor. I'm Director of Arts and Culture, but before that I was a columnist at the Detroit Free Press. I'm a writer by trade, warrior by necessity.
Amen.
I always like to ask people who are doing God's work in this way, what do you do when you are not in the courtroom? Because you are working all the time.
I give a lot of speeches at places like the Wright Museum. Now, I have an 11-year-old princess. My wife does a great job of raising her because I'm gone so much. I try to get home and spend time with her. I just signed a deal to author 2 more books, and so on planes I'm writing, notes and everything. But I try hard to, and Robin knows this, I try hard to use the blessings that God gave us at every minute to try to make a difference. I wake up every morning and I know what my mission is in life. I don't ever doubt it. I'm trying to fight to make a better world for all of our children. And implicit in that is that I'm an unapologetic defender of black life, black liberty, and black culture. Because if black people come up, everybody in America come up.
Other question? Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, I want to thank you, Attorney Crump, for your diligent work in defending people after justice has been denied, and meaning people have already been killed.
Yes, sir.
My question is a politically unpopular question. Why do we devote our time and talent, all these attorneys, politicians, and judges, to save a society that was born in deficit, that was born with a defect? I'm talking about America. 1619 to now, there's never been a peaceful moment for our people. Why do we devote so much time trying to make America be something that has only been in principle on paper, but it never been in practice? Why are we devoting time to making America something that it never could be?
No, that's a fair question. That's a good question, brother. I think, the Constitution is a great document if we made it real, this idea of being a more perfect union. But we still have to remember 2 things. America is still one of the few places in the world where you can improve your lot. I grew up with my mother and my 3 little brothers in the government housing projects of Wilmington, North Carolina. But because my mother understood the value of education and the fact that I was able to get an education, my station in life would not be relegated to that government housing project. So for all of the negative, nefarious aspects of America, it still is the hallmark for justice and so forth. Other third world countries, and I travel a lot, you're born in a certain station in life and you can never rise above that station in life. Well, we can make sure our children are well armed with intellect to rise above that station. So that's what's important about America. And then the last thing I would say simply is this here. Man, because as Thurgood Marshall said, they never intended the Constitution to apply to us, but we're going to make it ours anyway, because we're Americans. And think about it. That's what we've been doing, brother. There's nothing the enemies of equality can do to keep us down. And that's why I keep fighting this fight, because I know we're going to win. I don't have no doubt when I think about the precedent of what black people have overcome in America, being, defined as 3/5 of a human being when we first, formed this country. We overcame that. Then the Middle Passage, one of the most genealogical dynamics ever in the history of the world. I mean, we lost 3/4 of the people in the slave caves, and then we lost more on the slave ships. But we still survived the Middle Passage. And then we overcame the Dred Scott decision that said there were no rights that a black man had that a white man was bound to respect. We overcame that. We overcame, Reconstruction after the Civil War where we were supposed to be free. And they had the carpetbaggers and all kind of schemes, 40 acres and a mule, site, and it don't matter, you ain't getting 40 acres and a mule. We overcame that. We overcame Plessy v. Ferguson, separate but equal when it was anything but equal. We overcame that. We overcame Jim Crow and the lynching. We had the turn of the century. We overcame that. And then, in Thurgood Marshall time, we had to overcome, Jim Crow Jr., PhD, Esquire. And we overcame that. So what that tells me, brother, is there's nothing that the enemies of equality in America can do to keep us black people from rising. We gonna be all right. We gonna rise no matter what they do. And that's why I keep fighting the fight.
Ladies and gentlemen, Benjamin Crump.
Thank you,
I'm gonna follow this lady here. We're gonna go down. Thank you.